So, and let me mute all too. Um, Before we get started, I want to say that Ron had been in conversation with me after at Kiddush last Shabbat about the class and a question that he had about something that came up in class, and raised the idea of how to extend the conversation of class beyond class. If people had questions or anything that about anything that arose in the over the course of the class. So I thought that maybe we start each class now with uh, just if anybody had a leftover question from last week, we could start with leftover questions before we continue with the text. So I know I didn't warn people or let people know that I was going to do this, so you didn't have a chance to think about it. But just know that I'd like to, I think that might be a nice idea if people had questions left over, that this could be an opportunity when we're all here on Zoom to bring something up. Barry.
Well, I had a lot about your Jews in the news, but not
Oh,
about this,
yeah,
not
that's a
about this
different.
class.
Well, I tell you, the funny thing about the Jews in the news is that so far over it has like 360 views, which for any of my classes that, what I do with the recording is I upload it to my YouTube channel. So, and then I make it public. So most of the classes get, well, Bible class, because I don't send that link out to the congregation. Bible class maybe has 5 views, 6 views, something like that. Um, but this particular Jews in the News about the Larry David piece, I guess Larry David was a trigger for YouTube. And so 360 views, and it had some comments too. I don't like comments. And these, most of the comments anyway, I really didn't like one was Free Palestine. Uh, so I delete the comments. But I just don't understand it. And the one that I did, the Jews in the News I did last year about the campus protests, that had 600 something views. So it's just crazy. I mean, certainly not near enough to monetize and become an influencer where I don't need this job anymore. But still, it's kind of crazy that it would have that many views. But anyway, any Bible class questions? So, okay, so we'll just keep that in mind. And this is being recorded anyway, so people watching the recording, like Pesteller and others who are not here right now for this class, just keep that in mind as we go on. And also a reminder, today is May 2nd, that we have the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd as our last classes as we finish up this academic year. And the 23rd is Memorial Day weekend, but I think we could try and meet that Friday morning. So 3 more Bible classes, and then we'll take a hiatus for the summer and resume back in September. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we left off at verse 10 on page 42 of our Sonsino edition, which is chapter 8, verse 10, page 42. So let me just read the first 9 verses in English just to bring us back up to speed and remind us where we are. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Aviah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside from lucre, and took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah. And they said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not be king over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit thou shalt earnestly forewarn them, and shalt declare unto them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Okay, so it's just an interesting kind of dialogue in which God is being more forgiving of the people than Samuel is. And, just something to think about in that, we have from the Torah Moses being the one who's more forgiving of the people than God is, right? Especially after the golden calf. God wants to annihilate the entire Israelite population and start over with Moses. And Moses prays on the people's behalf and asks God forgiveness for them. And even though Moses says at other places, I'm fed up with these people, and he says it there too, in that same section, God, I'm putting up with these people. Maybe you can do something for me, like show me your glory, let me see your face. So Moses does act like a human being in that kind of scenario. This is a tough job. You got to give me a raise, kind of thing. But also at the same time, he's still praying for forgiveness for the people, and God is the one that is harsh, and we expect God. So in other words, what I mean by we expect God. So the image of God that is projected in the Bible so far is a God that is perfect, all-powerful, all-knowing. And here, God seems to be out of character, if we can say that about God, saying where Samuel is the one who's kind of speaking up on God's behalf and thinking that, no, acceding to the people's wishes of wanting a king is bad and shows disrespect to God. And God says, yes, it does, but give them a king anyway and let them know what they're in for. It's just to point out that this is just an unusual kind of dialogue that we have, and it doesn't represent, like it's an exception to the kind of dialogue that we have in the Bible. Yes, Dove?
How is God and Samuel having this conversation? Is it through visions? Is it through dreams? How?
Well, it's we're told that Samuel and God are talking to each other. So, in other places in the Bible, it'll say in a vision or in a dream, but it's not saying that here. So we're expecting, like, I don't know how Samuel hears God's voice, whether it's in his head or he actually hears it like around him. We don't know, but we do know that it's not a dream or a vision.
Okay. Thank you.
But beyond that, I can't say.
Yeah, it's just kind of, it's almost, you think in terms of people with mental illness, they're hearing voices.
Right. But that could be the case. But again, this is the Bible.
Right.
So the Bible's perspective is that Samuel is not mentally ill. And the people's perspective is that Samuel is not mentally ill.
Okay.
All right. So other people who might have heard about this, who are not Israelites, might have claimed Samuel's a crazy guy. But that story or version of the narrative doesn't make it into the Bible. Okay, so right, you get what I'm saying,
Yes.
So you could you see walking in downtowns, whether it's DC or any other city in the country, you'll see either people who are homeless with signs in front of them, or other people saying, God has spoken to me, or people just speaking out loud saying, God has spoken to me. Now, most of us would say this person has some mental illness, but there could be some followers of that person who would agree with that person and think that that person is hearing God speak to him. So it all depends on who's doing the speaking, and and which book. The fact that Samuel made it into the Bible and has been part of the Bible for, well, the Bible as we know it, canonized by the rabbis for 2,000 years. It's older than 2,000 years, but it's in the Bible for 2,000 years. Yes, Al.
I'm also thinking maybe the difference in outlook, maybe God is taking the long-term view or the more realistic view. And now we've had Eli, who couldn't even get his two sons to follow him, and now Samuel, who couldn't get his two sons. So maybe God's saying the system isn't working and we need to try something else.
Or I'll take that a step further, Al, that whenever the book of Samuel was edited, it could be a response to a time when there were already kings. And now here we're understanding what Samuel is about to say about what these kings are going to do, and then understand that when we read about those kings in the book of Kings, what Samuel says here is going to be true. So was Samuel written at the time of the kings, or was Samuel written at the time of Samuel, and this is a prophecy? So again, there's that perspective that we have to try to figure out and weave into our understanding of the story too. Barry.
Well, many of the, not all, but many of the sons of the kings were also flawed. I mean,
Oh yeah,
Solomon's
yeah. There are of all the kings.
I don't really have a sense. I mean, I know like Moses and Joshua were leaders, prophets, possibly. Then came the system of judges. And the judges, I mean, like, how are judges really different than kings? Is it just a name? Judges theoretically answered to God, but theoretically, wouldn't kings have done the same thing?
So yes, so judges are more regional, and kings are national. There's that. Judges are not necessarily wealthy. Kings are. Judges do not have palaces. Kings do. Judges, from what I recall in the book of Judges, did not have many wives. Kings did. Okay, so there are differences. Of all the kings of Israel, northern kingdom and southern kingdom, only a few are recorded as having not just an awareness of God, but a sense that God has spoken to them. So there is King David, there's King Solomon, that for sure God spoke to them. And other kings, maybe King Hezekiah. But that I'd have to, someday, if we get to 2 Kings, we'll get to the story of Hezekiah, but it's in Isaiah. So I'm hard pressed to find other examples of kings that actually spoke to God. Not all the judges spoke with God either. I mean, Samson, we know, had God-given powers, okay. So just had to read a text from the tech guy from Shul. So so it's when the Bible isn't giving us like a very clear transition to kind of point out to us, this is what the period of the judges was like, and now we're transitioning into the period of kings. It's happening kind of all at once. And the idea that there are prophets, I mean, Samuel is called a prophet, but we haven't had prophets before. Moses is called a prophet in the Torah. Joshua is not called a prophet. He's a leader. And the judges are not called prophets. Samuel is called a prophet. How that happens too, like Moses is called a prophet, but we're not told in the Torah exactly what a prophet is. We only we come up with a definition of a prophet based on what the prophets do. Okay, so again, so this transition from judges to kings, like I said, it's happening all at once, and we don't have a full understanding because the Bible doesn't define it for us, what a judge is, what a king is. Okay, so now let's pick up. We're on page 42.
John, before you
Yes,
go on,
Go ahead,
ask a
Marlene.
question.
Yep.
So in the Torah, is there a reference to kings that like God would
Yes,
say?
in Deuteronomy.
That you shouldn't have a king, but it's not forbidden. Is that
No.
correct?
In Deuteronomy, it says when you appoint a king,
Ah,
this is what the
okay.
king should do. It's in
Okay.
the portion Shoftim.
Okay.
Okay, so that begs the question also when Deuteronomy was written. Was Deuteronomy written at the time of kings, or again, was this a time, was this a law that was foreshadowing a time when there will be kings? Because it's the only place in the entire Torah that talks about, right? In other words, most of the book of Deuteronomy is a rehashing of laws that had been presented in prior books of the Torah. But there are some laws in Deuteronomy that are unique to the book of Deuteronomy, including the law for kings. Okay, so, yeah. All right, so page 42. Vayomer Shmuel et kol divrei Adonai el ha'am hashoalim me'ito melech. So Samuel said all the words of God to the nation, or to the people who are asking from him a king, right? So the people came to Ramah asking him for a king. God said to him, etc., what to say to the people. And now Samuel is about to say to these people what it is about a king. 11. Vayomer ze yihya mishpat hamelech asher yimloch aleichem et b'neichem yikach v'samlo b'merkavto uvefarashav v'ratzu lifnei merkavto. And he said, this will be the law of the king who will rule over you. He will take your sons and put for him, he'll take your sons and put them in his chariot. That is, he'll make them work on his chariots and his horsemen, and they will run before him, before his chariots. So Marlene's question I think we should look at the section in Deuteronomy to understand what the law of kings is, and then understand this from Samuel. So let me just go to my shelf. Okay, so pulling down the Eitz Chaim and looking at Deuteronomy in Shoftim. Just a second here. Here he is. Okay, so it's Deuteronomy 17, beginning with verse 14. Deuteronomy 17:14. And if you happen to have the Eitz Chaim on your shelf, beginning on page 1092. If, after you have entered the land that the Lord your God has assigned to you, and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me, right? This is the argument that the people said to Samuel. All the other nations have a king, we want a king. You shall, 15, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by the Lord your God. Now, you would think that Samuel knew the Torah, so that why would he argue with the people if he knew the Torah and he knew the book of Deuteronomy, and God says to Moses here in Deuteronomy 17, the people can have a king. So why is Samuel arguing when the Torah says he shouldn't argue that they can have a king? Which also begs the question, why didn't they set up a king earlier? Right? Joshua could have set up a king because supposedly he knew the Torah and he was there and he took over from Moses. So why didn't he set up a king? Whether they settled in the land, they've expanded as far as they were going to expand in his time. That would have been a time when he's about to die to set up kings. Why were there judges instead? So I don't have an answer. It's just historically, and the problem is trying to understand history from the Bible, because the Bible's point is not to teach history, but rather to teach the history of the people's relationship to God over time, not to provide for the reader an actual history. So we don't know the answer. But I think a legitimate question would be, if the Torah is saying here, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, and in fact, in 15, it's more than you shall be free. It's more of a commandment, som tasim, you shall set a king. Okay? Not you shall be free if you want to. It's almost as if it's a commandment to set up a king. Okay? One chosen by the Lord your God. And we'll get into that in the next chapter in Samuel. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. So that's category number one. It has to be an Israelite. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. So it begs the question whether a convert could be king in Israel, but certainly not a non-Israelite. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses. This is why I wanted to bring this up, because now Samuel is saying, if you have a king, the first thing we just read, if you have a king, he's going to take your sons and use them for his chariots. So now 16 in Deuteronomy says, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since the Lord has warned you, you must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. Okay? He's not supposed to keep horses, not supposed to go back to Egypt to get horses, not supposed to have many wives, and not to amass silver and gold. 18, when he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching. So he shall have a copy of the Torah written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Now, in the book of Kings, certainly, and in Samuel, when we learn about King Saul and King David, the Bible doesn't tell us about these kings having their own Torah. All right, so they could have, but the Bible doesn't tell us that they did.
A question.
Yes.
So the question of why the king was set up at that time and not earlier by Joshua. Could it possibly read the verse that you will set up a king at the time that people actually ask for a king, and they haven't asked until now?
It's possible, but it's you decide. So the verse says, verse 14, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. Yeah, you have to wait for the people to decide. So it's possible, but also the leader could decide. So it doesn't say, it says in the singular in the Hebrew, Va'amarta asima alai melech. You, singular, will say, I, singular, I, first person singular, would put over me a king. not we will put over us a king. So it just takes one person to ask. That's the way it's worded here. And then verse 20 to end this section, thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. Okay, so king has to follow the Torah too. Okay, so now Samuel is saying, we're back to page 42, after verse 11, where he said, the first thing he says about the kings is he's going to take your sons and use them for his chariots and to run before the chariots. 12. Velasumlo sarei alafim vesarei chamishim velacharosh charisho veliksor ketziro velaasot kalei milchamto uchalei richbo. So he's going to use your people, your sons, also to build like this infrastructure, which is captains of thousands, captains of 50s, people to plow his land and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and his instruments of chariots, right? So having a king will mean then creating this whole kind of royal infrastructure that we haven't had before. We're going to have a weapons factory. We're going to have royal estates that need tending. And who's going to do all this work? You. 13, Ve'et benotechem yikach larakachot ulatabachot ulaofot, and he'll take your daughters and use them to take them to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. Just by the way, a kosher brand is Rokeach, or maybe some people pronounce it Rokich, like reach for Rokich, but it's Rokeach is the brand. It's from this word. So a perfumer, a cook, and a baker. So not just your men are going to be taken, your women are going to be taken too. Yes, Dov.
Is this like a warning to the people?
Yes.
These are the consequences?
Yes. Yes, he's trying to dissuade them from choosing a king. Like, okay, if you want a king, but I'll just tell you what it means to have a king. Are you sure? So when he's done, are you sure you still want to do this? So, okay, 14. Ve'et sedotechem ve'et karmechem ve'et zeitechem hatovim yikach ve'natan la'avadav. And he'll take your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards, the good ones, and he'll take them and give them to his servants. It's like the people who make up the royal court are going to get your vineyards and your fields and your olive orchards. Okay? And we know this. I mean, there'll be a story with King Ahab all about taking somebody's vineyard. Okay? So 15, V'zar echem v'charmechem ya'asor v'natan l'sarisav v'la'avadav. And he'll take the 10th of your seed and your vineyards, and he'll give them to his officers, it's translated here, and to his servants. Now, a saris is a eunuch. So he might also be saying that he's going to take your men and he'll make them into eunuchs also. Okay? And that's anti-Jewish. You're not supposed to do that. 16, but the kings of Israel and Judah did have eunuchs from the people of Israel. 16, ve'et avdechem ve'et shifchotechem ve'et bachurechem hatovim ve'et chamorechem yikach ve'asa limelachto. And your servants and maidservants, and your good young men, and your donkeys, he will take and use for his work. 17, Sonchem Ya'asur, Vatem tiyu lo la'avadim. He'll take 1/10 of your flocks, and you will be to him servants. Right? So there's going to be this royal tax of agriculture and flocks and people that he's going to take for his own use. 18. U'ze'aktem bayom hahu milifnei malkechem asher bechartem lachem v'lo ya'aneh Adonai etchem bayom hahu. And then you'll cry out on that day before your king that you chose for you, and God will not answer. So the crying out means like you'll cry out to God, save us for this king who's taking advantage of us and impoverishing us, etc., etc. You're going to cry out to God about that, and God's not going to answer you on that day. 19. Okay, so that's the end of Samuel's warning. Okay, I'll set a king, but just know this is what the king's going to do. As opposed, like Samuel could have said exactly what I read from Deuteronomy. Wouldn't that have been interesting to say, okay, I'll set a king, but the king, just remember, we all learned the Torah. We all understand the Torah from Mount Sinai given to Moses. We all should have been familiar with this section in the second Aliyah of the portion Shoftim. Let's just be like it would have made more sense, I think. No, not more sense. It would have been logical that Samuel could have reiterated what was in the book of Deuteronomy. And maybe that would have been Samuel's function too, to make sure that the first king chosen sets the precedent by following the law given in the Torah in the book of Deuteronomy. So why didn't Samuel? So Samuel could have been, a couple things that come to my mind why Samuel didn't bring up what was in Deuteronomy. One, he's angry at the people because they've rejected his sons, right? And maybe he's just he's personalizing this as an attack on his family, and he's being negative in response. Like, you have my sons, and my sons aren't doing this to you, but if you have a king, this is what the king's going to do to you. So he's not denying necessarily that his sons are bad leaders, right? They're taking bribes, but he is saying, if you have a king, it's going to be worse, and this is what it's going to be. So that could be one reason why he's talking this way. Another reason is maybe he doesn't know the book of Deuteronomy. Right? As biblical scholars would say, the book of Deuteronomy was written later in the history of the kings, in a time of King Josiah, when he cleaned out the temple and threw away the idols and reformed and brought people back to Israelite religion. It says that a book of the Torah was found, and he used that as a guide. So some biblical scholars suggest that the book of Deuteronomy was written at that time. We don't know, but if the book of Deuteronomy didn't exist, then that would explain why Samuel didn't quote the book of Deuteronomy here. Okay, so we'll see if the commentary says anything about that. I didn't read ahead, so I don't know. Okay, so verse 19. Vayema'anu ha'am lishmoa bekol Shmuel vayomru lo ki'im melech yihye aleinu. The people refused to heed Samuel's voice. That is, they refused to pay attention to Samuel's warning. And they said, no, we want a king over us. All right, we hear you, Samuel. The king might do this. We don't care. We want a king. 20, V'hayinu gam anachnu kechol hagoyim, ushefatanu malkenu, v'yatsa lefanenu, v'nilcham et milchamotenu. And we will be also us, like all the nations, and our king will judge us and go out before us and fight our wars. 21, Vayishma Shmuel et kol divrei ha'am, vayedabreim ba'oznei Adonai. And Shmuel heard all the words of the people, and he spoke them in the ears of God. So that gets back to your question, Dov. How did Samuel speak to God? So this is an anthropomorphism, talking into his ear. So on my Zoom screen, I'm looking at, I'm leaning in your direction, Dov, and I'm turning to your ear, and I'm talking into your ear. That's what is depicted here as Samuel talking to God. 22, Vayomer Adonai el Shmuel, Shema bekolam, v'himlachta lahem melech, Vayomer Shmuel el Anshe Yisrael, lechu ish le'iro. So God said to Samuel, listen to them and make a king to rule over them. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, go home. Go home. Right? He's not deciding a king yet. Go home. Okay? Maybe that means go home and I'll work on getting a king for you. That it doesn't say that. It just says go home. Get out of here. Leave me alone. Okay. So, let's look at the commentary on these verses here. Back to page 42. The king's manner. The demands which the king will make are enumerated: military service, forced labor on crown lands and in the royal arsenal, service in the royal kitchens, appropriation of lands to reward the king's ministers, taxation and confiscation of slaves for the king's work. Run before his chariots, a bodyguard of runners so indispensable to the royal dignity that when Ahab was without one, Elijah ran before his chariot. So 1 Kings 18. Thousands, fifties, units in the army. Mention is also made of captains of hundreds in chapter 22. 40, verse 15, give to his officers. The proceeds of the royal tithe will be used to pay the salaries of the officers in the king's ministries. Your men servants, etc., not only citizens, but slaves and cattle as well, would be impressed into the king's service. You shall be his servants. The sum effect will be that you will have surrendered your freedom and become enslaved to your king, whom you shall have chosen. The sting is in the fact that your misery will be self-inflicted. 44, the reply of the people, fight our battles. This is not an afterthought, but probably the main underlying motive of the request for a king, although not expressed in the first instance. A king would be able to mobilize the whole people behind him, whereas before, only those immediately attacked had resisted, and the rest of the tribes had refrained from helping them. So that's Ralbag, a medieval commentator. Right? So in other words, the judges had to round up people. They had their own people who were with them to handle an immediate battle, but if more, then the judge had to call out for reinforcements from among the rest of the tribes. With the king, it would be more automatic. Spoke them in the ears of the Lord. The anthropomorphism is bold. Now that the people had refused to heed his warning, Samuel again sought guidance from God. Go ye every man unto his city. Apparently Samuel dismissed the deputation without giving a definite answer to its request. He awaited further guidance in the choice of a king. Okay. So, well, it's interesting. God said to Samuel, go pick a king. And it seems like Samuel's waiting to find out exactly who he should pick. So let's look at Alter, page 277 in the Ancient Israel. Asking of him a king, that's the last comment on 277. The Hebrew participle shoalim takes us back to the verb of asking used in Samuel's naming and points forward to Shaul, which is Shin Aleph Vav Lamed, and Shoalim Shin Vav Aleph Lamed, right? If you just transpose the Vav and the Aleph, Shoel, Shaul, it's the same letters. Okay, so Alter saying literarily it's not an accident that they're asking Samuel for a king, because Shaul is going to be the one who was asked. Okay. 11 on page 278, the practice of the king. This whole episode turns repeatedly on an untranslatable pun. Mishpat means justice, the very thing that Samuel's sons have twisted by taking payoffs. Mishpat also means habitual behavior, mode of operation, or practice. As a verb, the same root means either to judge or to rule. It is used in a verbal noun in the former sense in verses 1 and 2, in the latter sense in verses 5 and 6. The recurrent scholarly assumption that this whole attack on the encroachments of the monarchy reflects a knowledge of Solomon's reign or of later Davidic kings is by no means inevitable. All the practices enumerated, military conscription, the corvée, expropriation of lands, taxation of the agricultural output, could easily have been familiar to an early writer from observing the Canaanite city-states or the larger imperial regimes to the east and the south. So in other words, if you want to follow the scholarly tradition that this was written in the time of the kings, and this is like meant to be a warning against these very kings that are now serving over Israel, Alter would argue, well, that it could be that the people saw what the Canaanite kings and other kings around them were doing at the same time. So you can't 100% prove the biblical scholarly theory that the editor of Samuel was from the time of the kings already. Okay, who will reign over you? The people had spoken of the king ruling, judging them, the word shafat. Samuel unambiguously speaks of reigning, malach, the cognate verb of melech, king. All right, so just pointing out that Samuel's talking about a king. The people want a king to judge. Your sons he will take. Samuel's speech is solidly constructed as a hammering piece of anti-monarchic rhetoric. All the cherished possessions to be expropriated by the king are placed emphatically at the beginning of each clause, followed by the verb of which they are objects. He will take, one word in the Hebrew, yikach, is insisted on with anaphoric force. The speech moves systematically from the expropriation of sons and daughters to land and produce to slaves and beasts of burden, ending with the climactic, you will become his slaves. A modern American reader might easily be reminded of the rhetoric of a radical libertarian inveighing against the evils of big government and the encroachments of its bureaucracies and taxation. In no part of his pragmatic argument does Samuel mention the Deuteronomistic themes of abandoning the Lord or betraying his direct kingship. Chariots, cavalry, captains. The first item in the indictment of monarchy is military conscription. As is clear in the response of the people, in verse 20, the consolidation of national military power under the king is precisely what attracts them to monarchy. All this leads one to suspect that the domination over the Philistines was by no means so comprehensive as claimed by the narrator in chapter 7. to plow his ground and reap his harvest. The Hebrew is literally to plow his plowing and harvest his harvest. To make his implements, after conscripting men to fight and men to perform agricultural service, the king will also draft the artisan class for his purpose, ironsmiths, carpenters, wheelwrights, and so forth. His chariots, Samuel's emphasis from the start on chariots signals the political shift he envisions, for chariots were the instruments of the monarchies with which Israel contended, whereas the Israelites in this early stage do not have this sort of military technology at their disposal, at least according to the book of Judges. It's interesting, though, in the stables that are associated with King Solomon have been uncovered in a couple places around Israel. At least they've proven that they're from the period around the time when Solomon would have been king. And so we have proof, like in Megiddo and other places, that at least King Solomon did gather horses and create such a cavalry. All right, 14, give to his servants. Servants in a royal context would be the functionaries of the royal bureaucracy, whose service to the king was in fact often rewarded by land grants. Your cattle, the Masoretic text has your young men, but the reading of the Septuagint, Bikarchem, your cattle, is much more likely, given the fact that the sons and daughters have already been mentioned and that the next term is your donkeys. So in other words, in the Hebrew, changing the chet of Bechor Rechem, what is that? Bachu Rechem in verse 16, change the chet to a kuf, and you get your cattle, which could make more sense from context, but okay. And then 18, you will cry out, and he will not answer you. The language used here in relation to the king is precisely the language used elsewhere in relation to God. Compares chapter 7, where the people implore Samuel to cry out on their behalf to God. Cries to this power will not be answered. And then to finish the chapter on 280, a king there shall be over us. They do not say we will have a king, but a king shall be over us. Rule us. Again, the people use the ambiguous key verb shafat to rule, judge. Sally forth before us. This phrase reflects a specific military idiom. The full version of it is literally to go out and come in before us, that is, to lead in battle, to execute maneuvers. The military power that can accrue to the nation through the king is what is uppermost in the minds of the people. Go every man to his town. Though God has just instructed Samuel to comply with the people's demand for a monarchy, Samuel's immediate response instead is to send them back home to their homes. And send them back to their homes. His acquiescence remains grudging. He appears to be buying time, perhaps with the claim that he needs to find a suitable candidate. The reluctance will persist and grow after he has encountered Saul and anointed him. Okay, it's 10. Yes, Dov, unmute.
A thought occurs to me. We remember when, toward the beginning, where, and I can't remember the name of the city, but there was a city that was under, and they were bringing people from around the different tribes were coming.
Yes.
If they had a king, they would have a central defense force.
Yeah.
And I think that might be part of their motivation.
Well, they say they want the king to lead them in battle. So yeah, to have a national force.
They would feel stronger if they wouldn't be subject to losing the ark or whatever.
Look, it's I think the way the book of Samuel is written is to criticize the people wanting to have a king. It's not coming across as a very positive thing. But the king can be positive. I mean, the Torah says so in Deuteronomy. And not only you can have a king, but you should have a king. And if you have a king, then the king has to just follow these basic conditions, foremost of which is to be like a role model of Torah. So, for the Torah, it's a good thing to have a king. For Samuel, it's a bad thing. So, right, so we should keep that in mind, that the perspective that we're presented with in Samuel is a negative one, a critical one of the institution of the monarchy. And it begs the question as to then when the book of Samuel was written, or even doesn't matter. It just helps us understand the character of Samuel, who's anti-monarchy. But at the same time, to know that the Torah is not anti-monarchy. All right, so let's stop here for today. And remember that as I started the class, that if you have any other questions left over, you're thinking about it during the week, we'll start off next week's session with any questions or thoughts from today's class. All right, have a good rest of the day, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.